Great to be here. Yesterday was really a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to the discussions today. And Christina really set this up because things are changing really rapidly, and if we don't start planning now, it'll be too late. 5 years up the road. So when my father was working, he spent his entire work life. Oh, sorry. My father worked at one company his entire life, TRW. And that's no longer very common. I've noticed that presidents seem to come and go pretty regularly, usually going from one university to the next. And even in Japan, where, as you know, it's famous for being, company men, that's changing too. And so the question is, how do we maintain lifelong learning? And this is a very general problem, and I'm going to be focusing on AI, but this is something that's already happening. I'm saying that this is a problem we're already living with. And as you probably know, the internet has changed every aspect of our life in terms of, just knowledge. I used to go to the library to look up something in the card catalog. When's the last time you went to the library to look up something in the card catalog, right? Everything, from entertainment to commerce, social media, people, their relationships have changed because of this. How you deal with politics is a good example. It's still changing. I mean, that's the point. It's changing, and it will have an impact on education. And I want to just tell you quickly that there is this new platform of massively open online courses. This is a Coursera course that Barbara Oakley and I put together about 5 years ago, which was based on trying to help people who are struggling to learn. I mean, there are a lot of people who have trouble learning, especially as you get older. And this is a course that will help you. And it's practical advice, but based on neuroscience, based on psychology, based on what we know about how brains work. And it's wildly popular. We've had over 3 million viewers, learners who are very, very avid. I get fan mail every day. So I've taught maybe a few thousand students in my lifetime in the classroom, and here, multiplied by a factor of 1,000. So this is something that is available out there. There are 10,000 of these MOOCs, and just a couple of very quick things. First of all, it's not like a classroom where you get up and you give an hour lecture. No, we have 50 10-minute scripted videos with green screen, with things moving around. I give the neuroscience lectures after Barbara tells the practical advice. I get up and say, here's what your neuron looks like, and this is where memory is located, and this is why it's so important to have exercise, for example. And it's great because they get the practical advice, and then also they learn something about their brain, and a lot of interest. I mean, people are really interested in what's going on because it's a mystery. So the other thing is that the model here is not a course where you sign up at the beginning of the semester and then you go through and you end up at the end. Almost everybody finishes. This is more like a book. It's free. You can pick it up at any time. You can go to any lecture. That means that you can actually pick and choose. You can decide, I want to learn about, let's say, differential equations. Okay, well, you have 10 courses to choose from, so you can look at 10 lectures and find somebody you like, and then find the particular course, the lecture that you like, so it's really much more flexible in terms of how you pick and choose. And here's the beauty. The beauty is you can take it any time, whenever you want. It's available to anybody in the world. There are 200. We have learners in 200 countries. And now here's the part that really is, I think, the real reveal. And this is true not just of our course, but all MOOCs. the peak in the demographic is 25 to 35. Now, what does that mean? Oh, and half of the people have a college degree or higher, right? Bachelor or higher. So these are already well-educated people, or they're in the workforce, and they need new skills, right? And they can't afford to go back to school. But this is a way for them to go back and take that course they need in order to be able to get ahead in their job or to solve a problem that they have. And so this may be a good model for lifelong learning. In other words, how do you maintain freshness, and how do you and I like the idea of a recommender system. In other words, who has time to go through 10,000 courses to figure out what you need? So to have something, from a database, again, using some kind of a search algorithm, you go through and you find out, how people with that background who took those courses, how are they doing, and maybe giving some good advice. Okay, now I want to focus on something that has been in the news, and you have seen many articles like this. Replaced by robots. Okay, you might get the impression that, if we came back here in 10 years, you'd all be robots, right? You'd all be replaced by robots. Okay, this is, okay, jobs with high probabilities of being automated in the near future, mail carriers, woe be to insurance underwriters, 99%. Now, here's something interesting. Farm laborers. Okay, so in 1790, 90% of the workforce here in the U.S. was working on the farm. What is it now? It's 2%. 2%. If it were true that 97% of those 2% were going to lose their jobs, we only have a few thousand people working on the farm. Is that plausible? Well, what would it look like? So here's what some speculation, based on what's happening now, what it might look like. So this is called precision farming, and the idea is that you have drones keeping track of the local conditions, soil composition, moisture levels, and fertilizer, and beaming down instructions to self-driving tractors, right, that are presumably putting down fertilizer or seeds or something. And this is happening without any humans at all. So some of this is actually already happening. For example, there's satellite ways of assessing what the soil is like and the vegetation and so forth, and that's already being used. But if self-driving cars are a problem, this is one of these combines. It's incredible. These machines, they're just you can just see it. It stretches over hundreds of feet. I mean, that's going to take a long time to get that to be autonomous, because it's just too many gears and degrees of freedom and so forth. So the real issue here is, this may eventually happen. The question is when, and that's really what we need to ask. Nobody knows how long these changes occur. My guess is that this will happen long after self-driving cars, which I think are decades in the future, and I'll come back to that. So really the issue is, what the time scale is, and it's almost impossible to guess ahead of time, because it depends on things that are happening outside anybody's control. Now, a lot of the discussion today can be traced back to a report that the McKinsey Global Institute issued in 2017 entitled Jobs Lost, Jobs Gained, Workforce Transitions in a Time of Automation. And they predicted that 30% of all workers may be displaced by AI, and another 14% could be forced to switch jobs. So this, it got a lot of press, and since then there have been a lot of studies, and some of the numbers have been going up. Other studies, 40%, 50%. Not only did they get a lot of press, but if here's a survey of 11,000 workers found that 58% of job seekers think that AI will destroy more jobs than it creates. And that, in other words, the workforce believes that they're going to lose their jobs, right? So this is serious, because now the question is, what are they going to do? Let's get some data. So here's a study that was done analyzing 50 million job postings surveying hundreds of employers and thousands of job seekers. And they examined the specific use cases in 5 transitioning industries. So this is data on the ground. They found that AI created about 3 times as many jobs as it took away in 2018. Now, you probably know that unemployment in the US today is at 3.7%. It's a historical low. Nobody knows why. Well, this might be the reason that all these new jobs are being generated, and it's certainly true if you look at Silicon Valley. I mean, just think the internet has created, an enormous number of jobs, web designers. I mean, that didn't exist before. All of the machinery that goes into the internet, which is, all of the communications, computing, fiber optics, all of that, those are all new jobs. So it's always been the case that new technologies are being introduced, that they create new jobs. But the real question is disruption, right? And it has to do with time scale. So let's go back and look at some historical data. So 250 years ago, the steam engine was introduced. And that amplified human physical power by orders of magnitude. And what it meant was that a single human farmer could do the work of what previously took 100 farmers. Well, what happened to the rest of the farmers? Well, it turns out that it happened over a period of 100 years. I said that 1790, there were 90% of the population were farmers. By 1890, 100 years later, it was down to 43%. So that fell by a factor of 2. But that was enough time so that the children of the farmers didn't have to become farmers. They went to the city, where they worked in the factories that were powered by steam engines. And by the way, by this time, over that period of 100 years, steam engines went from being something which was very inefficient, and sometimes they blew up. Physicists created a theory of thermodynamics so that you can optimize it. You've understood how the basic understanding of the cycle of steam and so forth. And that meant they could make bigger engines, more efficient, and then by that time there were trains going across the country carrying millions of pounds, right? So that's an enormous increase in the efficiency and power. Now, so you see factories, it automated a lot of things like, making goods and so forth much more efficiently. So a lot of people who were in crafts and guilds, of course, they did lose their job. But by working in the factory, they could actually have much higher pay, right? Because they could produce much more. Therefore, all of society, the GDP of per person in society kept going up, along with their pay. So over a long period of time, everybody benefited, but there was this period of disruption when things were in transition. If you happened to be older and you had a skill that wasn't no longer needed, then that was an issue, and so we do have to worry about that. But there are it created new jobs that never existed before. For example, where does the energy come from for the steam engines? Coal. Well, that was a new job. There were in England, right? There were all these coal miners, whole towns that were devoted. The economy was based on getting coal out of the ground. Not the best of jobs, right? You'd have to be willing to work underground for most of your life, and you have black lung disease, and it was a dangerous job. But it created a new way for the country and for the supply chain to help fuel this new industrial age. And by the way, there are also environmental impacts. Apparently the skies of London were filled with soot, right? And and so they didn't understand. In fact, it was kind of like thought to be kind of like the devil's, kind of work that was being done here to pollute the environment. That all changed because it takes a while for people to realize that's not good, and we have to put on the chimneys, we have to put filters, and we have to make sure that the coal is the right kind of coal and so forth. That takes decades and decades and decades to get that right. It doesn't happen overnight. So what's going on today? that it might be an analogy to what I've just told you, this story about the industrial age. Well, the new oil are data. And data are pouring in. Why? Because computers have gotten so fast and memory has gotten so cheap, and the sensors have also, this is very important, Christina mentioned sensors. Sensor technology turns out to be really critical to all of this. To collect enough data, you have to have a pipeline going from the raw data to data cleaning, data kind of making sure that the data is in the right format, and all of that has to take place before it becomes information. But just having information isn't really by itself useful. You have to convert the information into knowledge, right? So that there's a whole pipeline that goes, and it is something that is gushing. And the question is, how is it being used? Who owns it? Who controls it? What is it being used for? Now, just as I showed you that you can create whole new classes of jobs, like the coal miners, what is the equivalent today? So I was in China recently, and the Chinese are sitting on mountains of data. But it has to be cleaned, it has to be labeled, it has to be put into a format that can be used by machine learning, right? And there are dozens of factories that have, just completely sprouted up with thousands of workers doing nothing, as you can see, but sitting in front of their screens, and the data is flowing through, and they're analyzing, processing, and so forth. I mean, in a sense, these are the modern coal miners. These are data miners, right? No black lung disease, but maybe some repetitive motion syndrome. You can decide for yourself. For some people, it's a really good job. Now, as I said, there's this pipeline, and at some point, you have to turn the information into knowledge, and that requires algorithms. And so this just gives you a very brief overview of where we've gone. Okay, the field of artificial intelligence has been around since 1956 at a summer conference at Dartmouth, where the name was actually coined. But that was at the same time that computers were just becoming commercial, and by today's standards, they were really primitive, like, vacuum tubes. And that meant that, you couldn't really write complex programs, but they started out, their idea, they were very ambitious, is to write programs that could replicate the function of the humans, right, our cognitive functions, intelligence. And they vastly underestimated the complexity of the problem. That is to say, although they could write programs that could play simple games, right, wasn't able to, for example, no one has still yet ever written a program that could see, right, or do anything serious with language. Why? And that's because these are very, very high-dimensional problems that involve, require huge amounts of data to be able to even get off the ground. And back then, they did their best. But it wasn't until computers got fast enough, and that happened about 30 years ago, when machine learning algorithms were developed that actually could look at the data and try to analyze it, categorize it, cluster it, and then organize it in such a way that then we could take a look and see and ask questions of the data. But it was really only 5 years ago. By the way, this was, Christina was mentioning, the early days back in the 1980s, when all of the learning algorithms were being developed. That was a neural information processing systems meeting that we went to, which were, they started in Snowbird, then went to Denver, then over the last 20 years, they've been in various places around the world. But the idea was there that rather than write a specialized program for every problem, you have to have domain knowledge, for example, in vision, computer vision, in order to be able to figure out how to distinguish different objects. You have to know a lot about vision. The beauty of learning is that if you have enough examples of images of objects, then you could extract from that in some automatic way what the differences are and help you categorize them, right? And then the learning algorithms that were developed in the 80s It took 30 years for them to be able to scale it up so that they were big enough to handle the big data that we have today. And that became known as deep learning. But all of the algorithms were known back in the 80s. It's just that the computers weren't fast enough. They had to increase by a factor of 1,000,000 in order to reach the point where they could handle real-world data and actually solve some of them in a way that really surprised a lot of people. So I want to emphasize here that the contrast between these two approaches, right? On one hand, you write a program, and on the other hand, you just collect lots and lots of data that is in the simplest form. The more sufficient form is labeled. Here's all of the pictures of cups. Here's all the pictures of flowers of various sorts and so forth. And then use this idea of learning. The same architecture can be applied to many different problems. You know, you don't have to program the thing differently. It's the same program. It's just different inputs. And that makes it applicable to thousands of problems, you know, where the data has accumulated. And of course, nature was there first, right? The idea that, you know, you learn through experience is something that got us here, right? A baby is born, and that baby could become a musician. It could become a tennis star. It could become a mathematician, depending on the environment it's in, you know, the education it's given, you know, some limitations of, you know, how strong you are and so forth. But the point, though, is that we have in our brains learning algorithms that have been the source of our power as human beings. And I actually think that of all the things, you know, we have these talents and we have language and so forth, but our special talent, which makes us different from all our species, is how fast we learn and how much we can learn, right? It's just we have bigger brains and we just have higher capacity. So let me just give you a generic view of what a network looks like. This is a network that has, as you can see, about 8 layers, inputs on the left. And this is an example of a medical application where you might have images of X-rays. You might have temporal sequences, for example, heart EKG, and then some discrete data like genes, right, the different alleles. And each one of those might have some information, partial information, on the disease you have, right? You have disease, you have genes that may predispose you to certain diseases. You may have anomalies in your heart, and maybe there's a blur somewhere in your lung. But the point is that when a doctor takes a look at the data, they have to integrate all that information. And the problem is that doctors are limited in terms of the data they have and also you know, how to put it together. We're just learning how to do that. But if you have enough examples of inputs from a patient and then the ultimate outcome, you can use that to train up the network to be able to predict on future examples, to generalize to other similar cases. And then one of the beauties, I shouldn't say beauties, but one of the advantages of this kind of a approach is that unlike a doctor who only sees a limited number of cases, you know, in medical school you're given sort of average cases, but then you go into the real world and discover there's a huge variety. But you know, there's only so many thousands of cases you're ever going to see. But you could feed thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of cases. And with the database you have here in State University, that means that it really could become able to handle much wider range with much higher probability in principle, right? But that's all depends on the data you have. Yes, question.
Would you mind just stepping me through that picture? I'm not getting the point. I guess that's an integration.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is meant to be more iconic than detail. I didn't put in the details. Okay, so these yellow ones are the inputs, and they just have values. Each of these gray lines is a connection. Yep. So, for example, this unit here is connected to all these, and the strings there tell you something about how the input contributes to whether or not the output is high or low. Right? It's an analogy to a neuron that gets a lot of inputs, and then has to decide whether on the basis of that, whether it's going to fire an action potential in order to be able to go downstream. And this is a feed-forward network, so that means it goes from layer to layer to layer to layer. And at each layer, it's getting information from a wider and wider range of inputs. And so by the time you get to the top here, it's reached a point where it's able to categorize. That means that it's able to you're training up on these different diseases, and it will have to decide which of these diseases is the most likely and what confidence you have in that.
Thank you.
Okay, but this actually is an interesting point here, which is that this is often called in the kind of popular press, this is a black box, and it's true. At the end of the day, you get a prediction, but you don't get an explanation, at least a human explanation that a human would understand, right? It's the explanation, it has to do with something with how the connections, it may be a million connections, and the pattern of activity is different on every layer for every input. So somehow that information is extracted, combined, and used to make discriminations. Well, what's happening now is really exciting because mathematicians are getting involved, and they're saying, well, wait a second now, it's not a black box. We have access to every single unit, every single weight, every single activity pattern, and they're analyzing it, looking at the geometry of the discrimination surfaces. They're looking at the clustering of the activity patterns, and lo and behold, you could learn a lot about how it works on the inside. I'm going to give you an example a little bit later in the talk of how we've actually been able to dig in and see the structure of the inside of this network. Well, that's, 5 years ago when the first deep learning network was applied to data from computer vision, it reduced the error in a big ImageNet competition from, there's 20,000 categories, 20 million images. It reduced the error by 20%, and in computer vision, reducing it by 1% per year was the norm. So it's like 20 years of research had been done automatically, and that completely switched computer vision. Now computer vision is basically deep learning because the variations of it, many different combinations and different types of networks that are getting better and better incrementally, but that's always what happens with a big scientific breakthrough. You have a big jump, and then there's a lot of incremental advances. Things get better and better and better. It takes a long time for that to get to the point where you've understood enough about it so you feel comfortable. Well, to recognize that achievement, the 2019 Turing Award was given for deep learning to left to right, Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton is a close friend of mine, and Jan LeCun, who over the last 30 years have basically been doing the incremental advances. As the computers have gotten faster and faster, they've been able to optimize and make advances which made it practical. The Turing Award, by the way, is generally considered to be equivalent of Nobel Prize for computer science. And this is the highest honor. So last year, I wrote a book about this. It gives the historical background where we are today and looking into the future. And it was published by the MIT Press. The Chinese translation came out just a couple of months ago. I was in China. These Chinese are just going crazy. They're just going all the way. They're startups. The government is putting billions of dollars in. For them, it's like a moonshot. And it's like in the top 10 of their innovation areas that they want to really get ahead of us. And so we'll wait and see. It's really, put it this way, I don't think that based on what we have today and just doing more of it is really going to solve all the problems. We really need to continue doing basic research, which is to say, developing new learning algorithms, developing better ways of analyzing the networks, and that's all beginning to happen. But let's just take a look at a couple of applications. So give us use cases for what we expect in terms of new jobs. Okay, so you're a dermatologist, and you're given a picture, and the question is, which of these are cancers? And it makes a big difference because if you miss this, you make a mistake, and that patient turns out to have cancer and you misdiagnosed it, they could be dead. So how many people think this is cancer? You're familiar with moles? Okay, you're right. It is. And what about this? Yeah, that's a very serious cancer. Okay. And then there's the intermediate cases in between. Who knows? There are 2,000 of these skin lesions. There was a article that came out in Nature 2017, in which they used 130,000 images of 2,000 lesions to train up a deep learning network, and the performance was about the same as that of expert doctors, about 92%. So, wow, so the headlines were, AI is going to replace the doctor, right? Why do you need it? And by the way, that's the best doctors, not just the average doc, right? Other doctors might not be as good. So they took the study one step further. What they decided to do was to pair up one of the best doctors with the AI as a partnership. And what they discovered was that together they could do 98%. So you can see what's happening here is that there's differences in terms of expertise here. The doctor has other sources of information, context, and so forth. And the AI may have seen more examples, but it's not as wise as the doctor. And so really the way it's going to go forward, it's not that the doctor's going to be replaced, it's just that it's going to enhance the ability of the doctor to diagnose and give care. And that'll be true for all doctors. So this is really going to help the healthcare system to be able to do that, to help the doctors become better doctors. Now, I made a prediction, and it's very difficult. I mean, when you make a prediction, right, you're really going on the line. So here's what I said. It will soon be possible for anyone with a smartphone to take a photo of a suspicious skin lesion and have it diagnosed instantly, right, with AI, right? This is what this is showing. This is a deep learning network, and this is your cell phone. A process that now requires a visit to a doctor's office, a long wait for the lesion to be screened by an expert, and payment of a substantial bill. Okay, so in January, I was driving along, and there was a company that was advertising called First Derm for $29. They could give you that service. So here it is. You take a picture of your skin lesion, you send it up and with some information about your gender and where you're from, and it comes back with what is with likelihood of what it could be, and if it looks like it might be dangerous, it even tells you where you should go to have it checked by a doctor. $29. And they gave an example of a girlfriend who had noticed a lesion on her boyfriend. Boyfriend, of course, didn't want to go in. They never do. But she got him. She took a picture of his back, sent it in, and they said, run to the doctor's office because this is early stage cancer. It saved his life. So this is already out there. Technology is out there. Now, what about something that has gotten a lot of press, which is self-driving cars? Well, Waymo, which was a spin-off from Google, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, is now been collecting millions of miles of self-driving in San Francisco and now several other cities, and there's a lot of other companies that have been putting out fleets. In fact, a lot of the automobile companies are investing, so this is billions of dollars that are being invested. And the technology is coming along very, very rapidly. But the question is, again, how rapidly and how realistic is it that we'll be able to have a self-driving car out there for the general public? There are various estimates, but I think that it's going to be measured in decades, right? It's going to be first. Already we can do cars on highways, right, interstates, because that's a relatively small number of possible accidents that could happen. Although for truck driving, it's really ideal because most of the time the truckers are going long distances. But once you get into the city, it's congested. There's a lot of opportunities there for unique situations that no one could have predicted. So there's all kinds of things that have to be done, and I'm going to show you now the steps that might be needed in order to get there. So first of all, why is a self-driving car something that would be helpful? Right? Why do we need them? I mean, we already have a trained-up workforce that can drive cars for us. Well, first of all, a typical car is only used 4% of the time. It means 6% of the time it's parked somewhere, in your garage, on the street, in a parking lot, right? Well, if you didn't need, I mean, if a self-driving car could be used by many, many people, right? You press a button, the car shows up, it takes you where you want. It will automatically, do that all day, and it won't take any parking space. And means that parking lots and parking lanes can be repurposed. I mean, of all the real estate in urban areas, I mean, it's a tremendous value there. Somebody is going to exploit that, maybe Kerry. Some companies are going to be disrupted. Auto body shops, right? There'll be fewer accidents. Car insurance industry, you know, that's going to disappear.
Oh, shame.
And this is something that's really, really important. 40,000 Americans die on the road every year in auto accidents. This is just the fatal ones. And from what? From what? Falling asleep. A lot of truck drivers fall asleep because they're driving late nights and overnight. Drunk drivers kill a lot of people, right? This is happening every day. That all disappear. We're not going to have 40,000 lives saved every year. But here's something that affects you, right? How many people here commute to work in their car? Okay. Usually at rush hour, right? And how do you feel when you get to work? You're pretty frustrated because of the fact that there's a traffic accident, you're an hour behind. I mean, it's not a pleasant experience. But nonetheless, we all do it. But if you can get into the car and have the car do all the frustration for you, just sit there and get some work done, right? They'll make it much more pleasant. But and it'll actually take the best route, and you don't have to worry about it. It'll take care of it for you. But billions and billions of hours actually of human cognitive time is going to be saved. And now here's the other thing: is that if the cars are going to have radar, they're going to be able to talk to each other. They're going to be able to caravan, so that you can get 4 times as many cars per mile of road than right now with humans who have to space themselves because their reaction time isn't fast enough, right? So they have to space by hundreds of feet. So this is, again, this means we don't need to build a lot more new roads. We can just use our existing roads more efficiently. And then finally, this is my favorite, right? Would you steal a car that would drive itself home? Okay. Now, jobs. What kind of jobs? Okay, so this is like a very typical setup in terms of the sensors. And if you look around, there's a long-term radar in blue and black. There's long-range radars, short-range radars. So there's you're 360. Doesn't have the problem with the back of the head. Cameras, lidars, which are laser sensors. So there's a tremendous number of sensors. It's like the equivalent of our body. Our body has tremendous number of sensors on it. I mean, just tremendous number. Our eyes, our ears, our skin. I mean, they're all sensors. And you need that data coming in at a rapid rate in order to be able to combine it. And those sensors are a really interesting industry, and there's going to be a lot of factories and engineers working on them and getting them to work efficiently in this context. I already told you about data cleaning, right? So there's going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands of the need for people just to handle data just coming in, making sure that it's okay. Now, here's another thing, okay? And again, these are unintended consequences that nobody has thought of yet, but I've been thinking about it a little bit. Okay, let's say truck drivers. Suppose you've self-driving trucks, okay? You're Apple, and you want to take a shipment of maybe $10 million worth of iPhones from across the country, right? I mean, if you're a criminal, this is the perfect way to get $10 million, right? You just go and you put yourself in front of the truck. Of course, it recognizes you. It stops. You go in. You take $10 million of iPhones, right? What does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have a security detail in the truck. Okay, so what does that mean? It means you've swapped a driver for a security person. Which is the better job? So the security person can actually go and bunk out in the back of the cab, right? Whereas the truck driver has to be alert all the time. So in fact, it's not like 10 million 7 million truck drivers that can lose their jobs. They're going to be turned into 7 million security people. So I mean, this is all speculative now. I have no idea if this is going to happen. But if I were a company, I would certainly want to have a human in the cab, not necessarily to drive it, but to be there to make sure it's safe and make sure that there's nothing that's going to happen. Now here's another problem. Okay, so self-driving cars, most of the time they're on highways going long distance, but then they get off the highway and they go through intersections and opportunities for all kinds of strange things to happen. And so this sounds like airplanes to me, right? Airplanes, they take off and they land. That's the complicated part. And in between, it's all autopilot, right? So airplanes already are self-driving most of the time. But we have air traffic people at the airports, because that's where they all converge, they congest, and you have to have someone be keeping track of the hundreds of airplanes up, surround, coming in at a regular pace. You don't want them to hit each other and so forth. Well, very likely, the same thing's going to happen with cars. You're going to have a car traffic congestion control, someone sitting there, and monitoring an area with several hundred cars, and making sure that there's something, there's not a potential problem, and if there is, you can do something about it. Like you can press a button and all the cars slow down, right? Just to make things a little bit safer. So there's all kinds of things like that we'll need humans, trained humans, in the loop, but we don't need. We're trading, instead of 100 people making small decisions, you need one person. So it's like the farmer. One farmer can do the work of 100. One human car traffic controller could do the work of 100 humans in terms of local control. Okay, so that's just a taste of all of the things, the secondary, tertiary, unintended consequences that might occur, and all the new jobs that are going to occur. But there's something even more amazing, and it's going to be transformative in the impact that it will have on society. So we are blessed, or as someone said, that the Americans and Englishmen are cursed by having a common language. And the reason is that we have different cultures. We use the same words, they mean slightly different things. Hundreds of different languages. Even within science and engineering, we have different languages, right? Jargon, we have difficult talking to each other. We're talking about the NIPS meetings. When we started these, this is 33 years ago, we had people coming in from every area of science and engineering, physics, math, computer vision, neuroscience, cognitive science, optics. And, everybody had a different language, and they go up and it would be incomprehensible in terms of the understanding the talks, right? The physicists would go up and start putting up equations, and of course, it turns off the biologists go up and start talking about all these anatomical terms, which of course, were gibberish to the engineers and the mathematicians. But over a long period of decades, something grew out of that, and it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It just requires a lot of talking to each other, listening, and reprogramming your brain. But eventually it happened, and it created modern machine learning. So the NIPS is the premier machine learning conference in the world. It just grew out of this effort by these people. And why were they there? They were there because they're all struggling with problems that the traditional techniques were not satisfactory. We're not able to solve it. Real-world problems like vision, for example, language. And language is a particularly interesting one because it was thought this would be the last one to go, right? The most complex human cognitive capability. And I remember growing up and watching Star Trek, and you remember the universal language translator, which it not just translated between human languages, but also alien languages.
That I never heard. Yes.
And of course, this seemed to me like it was completely fanciful and, typical science fiction. Well, it's right around the corner. So, to do language, it's more than just attaching a category to an image in a feed-forward way. You have to have a sequence of words coming in. And so you have to have a more complicated network, one that has recurrent connections. And this is actually a sequence of states at different times, from left to right as words come in German, ek, dicke, kiste. And at the end, a sequence of words comes out, which presumably has been trained by many, many examples. And there are big databases in the Canadian legislature. There's translation between French and English by law. So there's huge databases out there that can be used to train up these networks. And it's more than just training the weights. It turns out that in order to translate a sentence, you need to know at the end of the sentence what the first word was. So you need short-term memory, and that can be implemented, and we know that how it's implemented in the brain. Attention, okay, if you're using words like he, she, and it, you have to know what it refers to, so you have to be able to attend to specific words. And again, those are mechanisms we know about in the brain. You put them into the network. That's the beauty of this approach, is that nature's already solved all these problems. The reason why we can do language is because we have those mechanisms, so let's put them in. And about 4 years ago, Google Translate went from their previous engineered approach, which was phrases of 2 or 3 words, to whole sentences, which is what you can do now with deep learning. And it just jumped, the performance jumped up, and now with an app, you can take a snapshot of a menu, and it will instantly translate for you. So this is really amazing. I mean, this is really science fiction. But not just that, we can now look inside the network. We could figure out how does it actually do that. And so what you're seeing here is a projection of the activity pattern of 1 million units down onto 2D. And this is one sentence that has been amplified. And each of these dots is a word. And if you look down here, this is in 3 languages. So this is a network that was able to translate between 3 languages, English, Korean, and Japanese. And so, here's the English sentence, here's the Korean sentence, and here's the Japanese sentence. So you see each sentence is like a little constellation, right, in the universe, high-dimensional, million-dimensional universe. But you'll notice that for a particular, it means that these words, although they're different and different order and everything, they come up in the same galaxy, right? They're close because it was semantic similarity. So this is a semantic space. So it turns out the way that these language translators work is that they understand the relationship between words, and they're able to cluster them together semantically. And this is something linguistics failed to do. In the last century, it was thought that syntax, word order, had all the information you needed, and that was wrong. It turns out that it's really semantics. The same word can mean 3 or 4 different things, depending on the context. So unless you have a way of embedding the context into the representation, which it does, you won't be able to understand the sentence. So it's an advance in linguistics. It's not just a practical thing here. It really is, I think, a deeper understanding of language itself. Now, Amazon has announced that they're going to come out with a product. Already you can talk to Alexa, but Alexa will be able to take your English sentence and convert it with speech recognition into a string of words, and from there into a string of Chinese words, and then pronounce it. So you speak in English, and out comes Chinese.
So, I love this. Can I ask a question? So, will it sound like Alexa, or will the future will it sound like me? Can it, it should be able to, right?
Absolutely. Okay, for you, we'll make a special edition. Christina, well, you can talk to Christina. Okay.
No, but it should be able to. If they have enough, it'll happen.
Okay. How am I doing in time?
I think you were definitely.
Okay. So, there's been this focus on deep learning, but it turns out that is just the sort of on evolution, right? Our cortex is a fairly recent recently evolved about 200 million years ago when mammals came out of the dinosaurs. We used to be furry little animals under the feet of the dinosaurs, but we eventually came to rule the earth, right? And it's because of our cortex. However, animals are fine without it. And how do they survive? They survive because of reinforcement learning. So in the brain of the bee, and in fact, every species, there's conditioning. You can learn to associate a sensory input with a reward. And from that, you can then create behaviors that then are helpful. Now, this is a big debate that occurred in the 20th century, behaviorism in psychology. Remember that B.F. Skinner? So B.F. Skinner said, well, look, you can sort of, if you can do that, then you can kind of concatenate it and learn and maybe become a cognitive animal like humans. And, Noam Chomsky and others said, well, I can't imagine learning language. Well, we just saw that Chomsky was wrong about that. But the question is, what's really going on? Well, how is it that this classical conditioning actually got us here? And this was a theory that was worked out in the 80s, again, by Rich Sutton, who is an engineer, control theory. And what he realized was that you can use this over and over again to learn how to make a sequence of decisions to get to future rewards, optimize your total future reward. It solved something called the dynamic programming problem, which is used for programming airplanes so that they have an optimal combination of flights that they're going to take. And so it turns out that we have embedded in our brain, they're dopamine neurons, which are representing something called reward prediction error. That means that if you get what you expect, then you don't change any weights, but if you get more than you expect, you increase some of the weights. If you get less than you expect, you reduce some of the weights, right? So that's a very brief description of the algorithm. But what's amazing is if you pair this very primitive algorithm, which is in the basal ganglia beneath the cortex, with deep learning, you could become a world Go champion. So in 2017, Keynote, who is the world's champion in Go, and in Asia, by the way, this is a very popular game. It goes back 2,000 years, and it's more than a game; it's an art form. It's just beautiful patterns, and they have names for all the different patterns, and so he was beaten not just in 3 games by a little. He was trounced. I mean, it was like there was no contest. Like it's playing on a different level. Now the reason was that AlphaGo had played 100 million games against itself. And nobody knew how good it was, and so now they calibrated it. And here's what Keynote said: after humanity spent thousands of years improving our tactics, computers tell us that humans are completely wrong. It was because AlphaGo was creating moves that no human had ever seen before, which were superior. It was creative. And this is something, again, that we consider especially important for our species, to create new ideas and new products. And here's in this little world of Go, it demonstrates how to do that when you couple 2 different learning algorithms, right? Now it turns out that this particular combination can be used to solve thousands and thousands of problems. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples going down the road. Traffic light control. How many times have you sat there at a red light and there's no cars coming and say, why am I here? Actually, this is an aside. One of my projects is to work on mismatch negativity EEG of schizophrenia patients so that we can diagnose them. And so I was at a facility where we're collecting data, and they wanted me to give them a little talk. So I started the talk by saying, why are we here? And a voice in the back came, because we're not all there. Okay. So, so traffic light control, right now it's robotic. But if the sensors were there to sense all the cars and where they were, you should be able to use deep reinforcement learning. By the way, it's going to be different at different times of the day, different locations. So somebody is going to have to go and optimize this, write a program and learn from the data, and it's got to be constantly updated because traffic patterns change. On holidays, it's different from a normal day. So, but it's going to make the flow incredibly more efficient. Who knows how efficient. And it's not just automobiles. It turns out that web traffic, right? If you have a web system, for example, here on the bottom is the internal network that you have. This is all your workstations. On the top is the internet, so there's a firewall between you and the rest of the world. And every node there's about 100 parameters for system configuration that is set by humans, not optimally, just in order for it to work. And if you could optimize all those parameters, you would instantly have a much, much more efficient flow of information in terms of bottlenecks and all kinds of other problems that occur that you're not even aware of. By the way, did you know that the internet has weather patterns? There are people who, they have storms in New York, that, there's a crisis there and everybody's trying to get on the internet and they have to load balance the thing. I mean, this is incredible. Humans have to sit there and do this, but in the future, this could all be done automatically.
With a corresponding cyber problem. Yeah.
That's another problem that we could use deep learning to solve, right? Detect the cyber attacks. Okay, and that's already being done, by the way. Or spam. Getting less spam? Well, that's probably because you have a machine learning system that's been helping you. Okay, but it turns out that the biggest impact is going to be not on society, although that may be the most economic impact, but the impact it's having today on science and engineering. almost every day there's a new application for deep learning that pops up in the literature. And I'm just going to give you one example. Optimizing chemical reactions. So here's a typical problem that a big pharma has. They're trying to create a drug that can block some target. And they have some assay. And so they've created, maybe 1,000 or 10,000 variations of drugs. And then they've figured out, each one has a different efficacy. But they want to be able to predict which, others that might be better. And so there's a competition a few years ago where some company put it out. And I tell you, competitions are really good. You get a lot of work done for nothing, relatively speaking. And so the competition was they put all their data online, and they withheld some of it as a test set. And they said, whoever is able to predict on the test set better than we can, you get $10,000. So it doesn't take much, actually, to incentivize people. Well, a student in Jeff Hinton's lab at the University of Toronto, who knows nothing about chemistry, right, used deep learning and won the competition, right? Because, it figures out all the combinations, and it beat all of the physical chemists, all the people with domain knowledge who are trying to write the little computer programs based on all their knowledge and so forth. It just really blew them away, right?
What good is knowledge?
Okay, well, there's another way of solving the problem, and last year, Frances Arnold, who's a professor of bioengineering at Caltech, won the Nobel Prize for something she calls directed evolution. So here's what she does. She takes an enzyme, which has been optimized by nature for one reaction, but she wants to now design a new enzyme for a related reaction that they want to catalyze. So they make a bunch of random mutations. Don't have to worry about, in the right binding pocket, but don't worry what it is. Some of them are worse, a few of them are better, not much better. You take the ones that are better, you mutate those, and you go through that process. It's just like natural selection. At the end of the process, you come up with a new enzyme, which is actually much, much better. And so here's what she said. This is an email. My students all want to replace directed evolution with machine learning. So for the last 6 years, I've been learning a bit about the field. She also liked my book. Okay. So that shows with just existing algorithms what you can do. Let me just jump into the hyperspace. Now we're going into a place where no man has ever stepped foot before, or woman, or maybe women were there first. I don't know. Okay, so this is called a GAN, which is a generative adversary network, and it's unsupervised. It means you don't have to have labeled data. First, let me change the display settings here so I can play the movie. Okay, so what they did was they just gave this network, it's actually two networks. There's a network that discriminates, another one that creates images. But they gave it lots of pictures of celebrities. These are headshots of famous people and movie stars and people that are in this big database they have of thousands and thousands of real images, and I'm going to show you just a few of them. So these are real people looking for real jobs, probably actors on Broadway. This looks like a familiar person. Farrah Fawcett. See, I can recognize a few celebrities. Okay, thousands and thousands. Okay, so the idea is that the generative network has to come up with an image that can fool the discriminative network. The discriminator network has to decide, is this a real image or a fake image? So now these are the generated images, very high res. These people do not exist. These are completely synthetic, and you can make as many as you want. They look like they could be celebrities.
Isn't that fun?
Sometimes it makes mistakes. Okay, let's jump forward. Now, how did it do it? Okay, there is, within the network, there's something called latent variables. And now we're going to just take like a slider and slide through the latent variables. And you can transition between different faces, different sexes, different hairdos. This is really creepy. But this is the future. I mean, that we can create these things. It was someone at Stony Brook came up to me after I gave a talk there who said, I'm doing the same thing for videos. And it means that we can have give them a lot of Marilyn Monroe movies, and we can probably create a new movie that never existed before. Okay, now this came up just a few days ago with the GAN. I mean, again, you come up with a tool like a GAN. What else can you do with it, right? Is it just for making? You can use. I've seen pictures of outdoor scenes, bedrooms, and so forth. They look photorealistic. They look real. You can't really tell the difference. But here's something that came out of MIT. The title was Neural Inverse Knitting. From images to manufactured instructions. Okay, what does the paper describe? You take an image of a knitted garment like a shirt, use a convolutional neural network, that's the kind that's used for recognizing objects and images, and a generative adversarial network, or GAN, to produce a floor plan or blueprint that specifies at each point in a garment which of 17 different stitch types should be used. So it's like reverse engineering cloth. I mean, it's a tool. It can be used creatively for an incredible number of useful and practical and really interesting applications. Okay, here we are today. On May 9th at Bloomberg, there was a launch of a new AI institute at Stony Brook, the AI-driven discovery innovation. And you can see photos here. Who was very,
Are they real?
very. You can tell he's very proud, but and with the founding director, and I was there, and I was really. This is really a lot of energy. It was incredible. I mean, there's a lot of planning that went into it, and I've heard now yesterday all of the fruits that are already coming out of it between people who are in engineering school and people who are in medicine and people who are. In every department. It's really interesting. It really has applications almost everywhere where there's data. But that's not all. There was another announcement that was made recently of a $2 billion investment IBM is making at Poly. And what's it for? AI Hardware Center. Okay, so this is something you haven't read about, but I've been following this. There are 100 startups out there which are building special purpose machine learning chips. Well, it turns out Google and Amazon have already built their own special purpose deep learning chips. But these are going to be even more powerful. It's going to develop into a whole new line of chips, just like there are CPUs and data processing chips, DSPs, signal processing chips. There's going to be machine learning chips. And so this is going to rejuvenate the chip industry. It's going to create a whole new different type or line of chips. And New York is in a position to really be a leader in this area. So, and this is something that I've been telling you about, which is the Neural Information Processing Systems meeting. This coming year, it's going to be in Vancouver, and we anticipate 14,000 people. It's been going up 40 to 50% every year for the last 5 years. And we're running out of space because there aren't many places now. We're reaching the point where very soon there will only be a half dozen places in the world will be big enough, which for me is scary because I've been running the meeting out of my back pocket for the last 30 years. No longer possible. Now we have a big team. But what's really exciting there is that it's attracting a tremendous number of people from many different fields. This is the convergence point. This is where science and engineering and medicine, they're all converging because there's so many applications, workshops. Okay, it used to be the case, Christina would remember this, where at our first meeting in Denver, we went up to the ski resort for the workshops. And there was nothing planned. We just went up and people would put up little signs. If you want to talk about speech, come to this room. Now remember, I went to a meeting on aplesia that was being organized by a neuroscientist in the hot tub. But now, some of the workshops have 2,000 people. So the workshops themselves have become major scientific meetings. And there's like 20, there's typically, we have about 40 workshops in 2 days. Now, at the same time that this big revolution is going on in computer science and in applications, there is a similar revolution that's occurring in neuroscience. And I've alluded to this already yesterday, Brain Initiative. Brain Initiative has ramped up our ability to record from neurons. We are going to learn in the next 10 years more about the brain than everything we've ever learned in the past, up to that point. It's because we can record from 10,000, 40,000 neurons at the same time. Before, it was one at a time. So now you can do in one day what before would have taken, 100 labs working for years. So this is really going to catapult us in the future. And as we learn more and more about the brain, it's going to enhance, just the way thermodynamics enhanced the steam engine, we're going to enhance these deep learning networks. And they're going to go from today's primitive steam engines, equivalent, to something that is much, 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 much more powerful, like a train, a steam engine on a train, which is amped up and powered by factors of many thousands. So this is now looking into the future, and that's why it's important that the neurobiologists and the engineers are talking to each other, because this is going to help raise the level of everybody. And by the way, the insights that the engineers have from these deep learning networks already are being used to illuminate the data that are being collected by neuroscientists. So there's already a two-way street there, and there's going to be more and more traffic. Finally, and I just want to give you some 40,000-foot level perspective on where this all came from, because this is like an industrial revolution over 100 years. So, okay, deep learning, AI, and neuroscience are like the tip of an iceberg, right? What's beneath it? It's all being driven by digital computers. Digital computers were exponentially increased in power over 50 years, from 1950 to 2000 roughly, right? So really with the revolution that's occurring right today is really just the endpoint of an even bigger revolution. It's really digitization of information that is really driving everything. It's a digital computer. That's the engineering achievement, which is increased by factors of 1 billion. There's no other products I know that have improved by a factor of 1 billion. Cars haven't. Okay, but where did the digital computers come from? Fundamental physics in the first half of the 20th century. So really, we're talking here about 100 years of basic science, engineering achievements, and finally, we're seeing this kind of the endpoint, the impact that it's having now on citizens, everybody, the internet, all of the things that we take for granted today really grew out of this basic, things that came out of the 20th century. And who knows where it's all going to end. We're living in the age of information. Where is this going? Where is it going to be? Well, information in the genome, that's information. Information in the brain, right? This is like, we're just tapping into it. Eventually we'll have everybody's genome. We'll have everybody's brain connectivity. We'll be able to understand individual differences. And so finally, thank you for your attention.